Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Resnick here with a very special presentation. Recently I had the chance to sit down and speak with the Radiant One, Jason Redondo, a man who has been around the wrestling business for quite some time. He has wrestled countless opponents, traveled all over the West Coast. He has held numerous championships, and he's a guy who's definitely put a lot of miles on his body. Jason Redondo sits down with us and tells the story of his career. And in this story, he includes names such as Chris Jericho, Shawn Michaels, the late great Yokozuna. He talks about his travels and encounters in various promotions along the West Coast, as well as even his time on a television sitcom on the WB. Now join me as I talk with the Radiant One, Jason Redondo. Jason, tell me, what are your earliest memories of being a fan of the sport of professional wrestling?
My earliest memories. I remember being a 8-year-old flipping the channels, and I saw a wrestling match. I'd never watched wrestling before, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was Gino Hernandez and Tully Blanchard in a promotion called Southwest Wrestling on USA Network before WWE was on there, and they were taking on the Invaders. They were Gino and Tully were baby faces at the time, and I watched Gino, who was the crowd was going nuts for. You know, they ended up winning the match, and you know, Tully and Gino, they were celebrating. They just beat the Invaders, who were the tag champs. And then next thing you know, Tully turns on Gino. And I thought, oh my God, how can someone turn on their partner? They just won the championship. And ever since that day, I've been hooked on pro wrestling.
Who were some of your favorite wrestlers growing up?
I'm not gonna lie, I was a Hulkamaniac. You know, I love Bob Backlund, Jimmy Superfly Snuka. There's a lot of them. You know, later on in my life, you know, when I got in my teens, you know, I liked Shawn Michaels, and I was even an Ultimate Warrior fan.
Now, moving forward, fast forwarding, I guess, many years, you have quite an interesting story on how you ended up as a professional wrestler that many people definitely do not know. Tell us about that journey.
Well, you know, it was a story I used to hide. You know, can't really say it. I don't know if I was ashamed or I was scared because, well, here's my story. I know a lot of the wrestlers, they could easily say they had the same story where, you know, they grew up in alcoholic families, like myself. They could also say that they were homeless, like I was. But I remember I was trying out for a baseball team when I was in the 9th grade, my high school baseball team, and you needed a physical. Well, doctors checked my heart, and something my parents didn't tell me, but I was born with a small hole in one of the valves in my heart. And doctors basically told me I needed open heart surgery. And you know, when you're a kid, you think, man, you feel just as strong as everybody else, you just want to be normal. But when doctors tell you, you know, if you don't have surgery right away, within the next year, you can need a new valve. If you wait a little bit longer, you can need a new heart. And they said, be honest, they said, you're slowly dying. You might not even make it to your 30th birthday. And, you know, I had to have surgery. While I was in the hospital, everybody knew I was a big wrestling fan. And the room I had didn't have cable in it. So the doctor found out, you know, I was missing my wrestling show. So he immediately, I had kind of an arrogant doctor. He said, I want you to have your room to watch your wrestling. So he put me in a room, and I got to watch all my wrestling shows from the then NWA, the AWA, and the then WWF, now WWE. But there was one day I was laying there, and I was watching AWA. I watched this one wrestler doing moves at the time that were really innovative. You know, nowadays they're not so much innovative. You know, making the crowd go nuts. And with all the tubes in me, in every place you could think of, I told myself while I laid there, I'm going to be a pro wrestler. And that young wrestler that I was watching on TV just happened to be Shawn Michaels.
So I guess the next question would be, how did you end up going from the hospital bed into the wrestling ring?
Well, 3 years later, when I graduated high school at the age of 18, I met a guy who was going up to San Redondo and getting trained for his first match by Jesse Hernandez. And he said, hey, you want to tag along? And I actually had my first match in 2 months when it was taking him over a year, and he still hadn't had his first match yet.
Now, you also worked for Golden State Wrestling right after Bay Area Wrestling, correct?
Right.
Tell me about your time there.
Being part, the NWA, Dave Marquez's first shows, he told me I was on his first show for Outlaw Wrestling that he used to promote.
And who else was on that card?
Oh man, there was a Rick Sadist and GQ Rigolato and the Thunder Machine. Saying all these old names just brings back the memories, like Larry Ludden and Scott Cole and the Thrashmaster and all those guys. Guys that aren't even here today. Some aren't even here today.
I mean, you really, it's clearly apparent that you went through different eras of professional wrestling, different rosters, different groups of guys that, like you said, were there at one time, and now you're with a whole new wave, huh?
Right. I'm the old, nowadays I'm the old veteran. I'm like the uncle that people come up for advice, or before I was the young kid, the quiet kid, and now I think I'm looked upon as the old veteran, I guess you'd say.
Now, early in your career, you also found yourself wrestling some of the all-time greats. You were in the ring with Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, the late Yokozuna, the late Bam Bam Bigelow. You were in the ring with the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels. Tell me about your memories of wrestling some of the greatest wrestlers of all time. I mean, how did you end up working for the WWF for those matches? Or now the WWE, but at that time.
The first round, I got booked by Billy Anderson, and then later Louis Spicolli. And my early memories, it's funny, is you watch these guys on TV, and you think, wow. And then when you're in the same dressing room with these guys, I mean, I was like a kid, like a big kid. I mean, I didn't know, how much a fan I was until I was in that place with the same guys. I was watching guys I saw on TV, The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. Like I said, my dream was always to wrestle Shawn, and I could say I did it. I could also say I was the first one he started finishing with the super kick, or Sweet Chin Music, which it's called. Those are memories I can't ever lose. Scott Hall giving me a hug, telling me I did great, or Brian Knobbs giving me a hug and also telling me the same thing, and like I said, these are guys we all watch on TV, and them telling me you did great and you did awesome. It's, you could never lose those memories.
How did you feel knowing that, just earlier you mentioned, lying in a hospital bed, with all the tubes in your body, and saying to yourself, my dream is I'm going to make sure I get in that wrestling ring, and then here you are, and you're in that ring with Shawn Michaels. I mean, what were you feeling when you're in that ring and you're looking upon these crowds of people, and there across the ring from you is the Heartbreak Kid?
Well, what's funny is when I got to the arena that day, and before I found out who I was working with, I see Scott Hall from a distance pointing at me. And I had wrestled Scott Hall like 3 months earlier, pointing at me with Rene Goulet, who put the matches together at that time. I thought, are they really looking at me? They pointed at me. I thought they were looking at somebody else. And next thing you know, Rene Goulet comes up to me and goes, hey, do you want Michaels tonight? And I thought in my head, I was in a hospital bed earlier, years earlier, and I thought, he was the guy who made me want to be a wrestler, and here I am about to wrestle him. And in my head I was doing cartwheels, but the only thing that came out of my mouth that night was, yeah, I guess so.